On October 14, 1912, Theodore Roosevelt was shot in the chest at close range. Blood spread across his shirt. The crowd panicked. People screamed and rushed toward the gunman. But instead of going to the hospital, Roosevelt walked onto a stage and began giving a speech. And by the end of the night, many people believed the former president had survived death not once but twice in the same day. This is the story of one of the most unbelievable assassination attempts in American history. A story involving a hidden gunman, a bullet slowed by paper and steel, and a wounded presidential candidate refusing medical treatment while bleeding internally. To understand why Theodore Roosevelt was in danger that day, you first have to understand the political chaos of 1912. Roosevelt had already served as President of the United States from 1901 to 1909. He was one of the most famous political figures in America, energetic, confident, aggressive, and deeply popular with many voters. But after leaving office, Roosevelt became increasingly frustrated with President William Howard Taft, the man he had once supported as his successor. The two men split politically, and in 1912, Roosevelt decided to run for president again under the Progressive Party. The campaign became one of the most intense elections in American history. Roosevelt traveled constantly across the country, giving speeches and drawing enormous crowds. Supporters admired his strength and energy. Critics viewed him as dangerous and overly ambitious. Political tensions were growing across the country. Then came October 14, 1912. Roosevelt arrived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for a campaign stop. That evening, he exited the Gilpatrick Hotel and walked toward an open car waiting to take him to the Milwaukee Auditorium, where thousands of supporters were waiting for his speech. Crowds lined the streets cheering for him. But hidden inside the crowd was a man named John Schrank. Schrank had been following Roosevelt for weeks. According to reports later found by investigators, Schrank believed the ghost of assassinated President William McKinley had appeared to him in dreams and warned that Roosevelt should not seek another term. Schrank carried a revolver and waited for the right moment. As Roosevelt greeted supporters outside the hotel, Schrank suddenly stepped forward from the crowd and fired directly at him. The bullet struck Roosevelt in the chest. People immediately panicked. Members of the crowd and Roosevelt's aides rushed toward Schrank and tackled him before he could fire again. Some people began shouting for the gunman to be killed on the spot. But Roosevelt shocked everyone. Even after being shot, he remained standing. Witnesses later described him calmly raising his hand while blood slowly spread across his clothing. Then Roosevelt noticed the crowd attacking Schrank. Instead of calling for revenge, Roosevelt reportedly shouted, "Don't hurt him." He ordered police to take the shooter into custody safely. But the strangest part of the story came next. Roosevelt refused immediate medical treatment. At first, many people around him believed the wound might not be fatal. But Roosevelt understood something important. As an experienced hunter and outdoorsman, he knew that if he had been coughing blood, the bullet likely reached his lung. Since he was not coughing blood, he believed the injury might not immediately kill him. Still bleeding, Roosevelt insisted on continuing to the auditorium to give his scheduled speech. And this decision may have nearly killed him a second time that same night. Before arriving at the auditorium, Roosevelt checked his pocket and realized something extraordinary had happened. Inside his jacket was a thick folded copy of his speech manuscript and a metal eyeglass case. The bullet had passed through both before entering his chest. The speech manuscript was around 50 pages long. Combined with the steel eyeglass case, it slowed the bullet enough to prevent deeper damage. Without those objects, doctors later believed the shot could have entered Roosevelt's lung or heart. The papers and glasses had likely saved his life. But Roosevelt was still wounded, and now he was about to stand in front of thousands of people while bleeding internally. When Roosevelt walked onto the stage, many people in the audience still had no idea he had been shot only minutes earlier. Then Roosevelt revealed the truth himself. His opening words instantly stunned the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot. The audience gasped. Some people screamed. Others begged him to stop speaking and seek medical help immediately. But Roosevelt refused to leave. Then he delivered one of the most famous lines in American political history. It takes more than that to kill a bull moose. The phrase referenced the nickname of Roosevelt's Progressive Party. And despite the fresh gunshot wound in his chest, Roosevelt continued speaking for nearly 50 minutes. Blood slowly spread across his shirt while he addressed the crowd. Witnesses later described him pausing occasionally but refusing to stop. People watching realized they were witnessing something almost impossible. A former president delivering a political speech after surviving an assassination attempt only moments earlier. By the time Roosevelt finally agreed to seek medical treatment, he had lost a significant amount of blood. Doctors examined him and discovered the bullet had lodged inside his chest muscle after passing through the speech manuscript and eyeglass case. Fortunately, it had not reached his lung. Removing the bullet was considered dangerous, so doctors decided to leave it inside his body permanently. Roosevelt carried the bullet for the rest of his life. The assassination attempt shocked the United States. Newspapers across the country covered the story. Many Americans viewed Roosevelt's actions as almost superhuman. Even political opponents expressed admiration for his calmness and toughness under pressure. The image of Roosevelt standing on stage wounded but still speaking became one of the defining moments of his public life. But the story also revealed how dangerous American politics had become. Presidents and political leaders increasingly faced threats and violence during periods of national tension. And Theodore Roosevelt had come terrifyingly close to becoming another assassinated American president. What makes the story especially unbelievable is how many things had to happen perfectly for Roosevelt to survive. The bullet hit his speech manuscript first, then the metal eyeglass case. The damage slowed, the angle changed, and Roosevelt survived. But his decision to continue speaking while wounded could easily have turned fatal if the injury had been worse than he realized. In many ways, Roosevelt survived two dangers that night. First, the bullet itself, and second, his own refusal to stop speaking afterward. Today, the damaged speech manuscript and eyeglass case still exist as historical artifacts. The bullet holes remain visible, physical evidence of the night Theodore Roosevelt nearly died during a presidential campaign. And more than a century later, the story still feels almost impossible. A gunshot fired at close range, a wounded former president refusing medical treatment, a speech delivered while bleeding, and the campaign event transformed into one of the most dramatic moments in American political history. The assassination attempt did not stop Roosevelt from continuing his campaign, but the 1912 election ultimately ended in victory for Woodrow Wilson. Still, Roosevelt's actions that night became legendary, not because he won the election, but because of the extraordinary way he responded to danger and violence. Today, many Americans remember Theodore Roosevelt as a president, explorer, soldier, and conservationist. But one of the most remarkable moments of his life happened in Milwaukee in 1912, the day he was shot in the chest, refused to leave, and gave a speech while bleeding in front of thousands of people. More than a century later, the blood-stained speech manuscript and damaged eyeglass case still survive, a reminder of the night Theodore Roosevelt was shot and refused to stop speaking. If you want more hidden American history they never taught in school, subscribe for the next story.